The first rule of surviving Manhattan is simple. If a man in a $12,000 suit looks at you like he already knows your secrets, do not give him a reason to remember your face. I learned that rule too late, on a Thursday night in November, while balancing a silver tray of top-shelf whiskey in a restaurant where I could never afford to eat. The windows of Bellefonte stretched from floor to ceiling, turning the rain outside into rivers of gold under the city lights. Inside, everything glowed. Crystal chandeliers, white linen, polished marble, women in dresses that probably cost more than my monthly rent, men with watches that could have paid off my student loans. And me, Claire Bennett, 24 years old, 2 semesters away from finishing nursing school, wearing a black waitress uniform with shoes that pinched my toes and a smile I'd perfected for people who never looked twice at the help. It had already been a long shift. My lower back ached. My hair was slipping from the knot I'd twisted it into before clocking in. I had exactly $87 in my checking account, a past-due electric bill sitting on my kitchen counter, and a text from my landlord I still hadn't opened because dread was easier to manage in small doses. I was on my way to table 14 when Marco hissed my name from behind the bar. VIP room. Now. And don't make eye contact unless you're spoken to. That got my attention. Marco only used that tone when someone very rich or very dangerous walked in, and sometimes in Manhattan, those were the same thing. I picked up the tray he'd prepared and headed toward the private dining alcove at the back of the restaurant, the one hidden behind smoked glass and velvet curtains. The air changed the second I stepped inside. It always did around Real Power. The table held 4 men. 3 were talking in low, controlled voices, their suits dark, their expressions unreadable. But the 4th man said nothing at all, and somehow that made him the center of everything. He sat at the head of the table, one hand resting near an untouched glass of whiskey, his posture loose in a way that wasn't relaxed so much as absolutely certain. Damien Moretti. I didn't know his name yet, but I knew what he was the second I looked at him. He was somewhere in his early 30s, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, sharp enough to look carved instead of born. Not flashy, not loud. No desperate need to prove anything. Men like that were the ones everyone else watched before making a move. His suit was charcoal, perfectly cut. His white shirt was open at the collar, no tie, which somehow made him look more dangerous, not less. He lifted his eyes when I approached, and for half a second I forgot every line Marco had drilled into us about composure and professionalism. It wasn't that he was handsome, though he was. It was the stillness in him. The kind that made you feel like if he chose to speak, everyone else would stop. Your whiskey, sir, I said, keeping my voice even. I set the tray down, then reached for the crystal tumbler waiting by his plate. That was when I saw it. A hand. Not his. The man standing slightly behind him on the left, maybe security, maybe something else, had a silver ring on his right hand. He moved with the smooth efficiency of someone who had practiced not being noticed. 1 second his fingers brushed the edge of the table. The next, something clear slipped from a tiny vial hidden against his palm and disappeared into the amber whiskey. No one reacted. Not one of the men at the table. Not the servers behind me. Not Marco outside the curtain. It happened so fast I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Almost. But then the surface of the drink caught the chandelier light, and I saw the faintest ripple. My heart slammed so hard it made my fingertips numb. I should have stepped back. I should have told someone. I should have done anything except what I did next. But instinct moved faster than fear. I picked up the glass I had just poured for the man beside Damien, switched the tumblers in one clean motion, and set the new one down in front of him like I was correcting a place setting. My hands never shook. Years of working tables had taught me that much. My apology, I murmured. Wrong glass. No one spoke. The room didn't even seem to breathe. Then Damien looked up at me. Really looked at me. His eyes were dark, almost black under the low light, and there was nothing confused in them. Nothing surprised either. Just a cold, immediate understanding that traveled straight through my skin and settled somewhere behind my ribs. He glanced once at the glass, then back at me, and I knew with absolute certainty that he had seen everything. Worse, I knew he understood exactly what I had done. One of the other men kept talking about shipping routes and investment percentages like the world hadn't tilted off its axis. The man with the silver ring had already stepped back into stillness, his face blank, his posture unchanged. But Damien Moretti never took his eyes off me. Not for 1 second. I forced myself to straighten, forced my feet to move, forced my face into the neutral expression of a waitress who had no idea she had just stepped into something she should never have seen. I turned to leave. Mississippi, his voice was low, smooth, controlled. It stopped me more effectively than a hand on my wrist ever could. I looked back over my shoulder. He nodded once toward the glass I had put in front of him, the safe one, and said quietly, "Leave the bottle." Then he held my gaze for a beat longer, as if sealing some private understanding between us, and added, "And stay where I can find you." My feet moved before my mind did. I stepped out of the private alcove with the empty silver tray balanced against my hip, but I could still feel his gaze on me like heat through fabric. "Stay where I can find you." The words followed me all the way back to the service station, settling somewhere between my pulse and my pride. I should have been offended. I should have been angry. Instead, I was terrified in the quiet, practical way people get when they realize one wrong decision could rearrange their whole life. Marco snapped his fingers in front of my face. "Claire, table 9 is waiting on dessert." I blinked at him, forcing myself back into the rhythm of the dining room. Plates, smiles, refilled water glasses, credit cards placed neatly on silver trays. Around me, Belafonte carried on in its usual polished illusion. Laughter rose from the bar. A woman in diamonds complained that her sea base was too cold. A man in a navy suit tipped me $10 without once looking up from his phone. It was absurd. A poisoned drink sat 50 feet away, and the world had not so much as wrinkled. I made it through the next 20 minutes on instinct alone. My body knew the work even when my mind kept circling back to the silver ring, the ripple in the whiskey, and Damien Moretti's expression when he looked at me. Not shock, not gratitude, recognition, as if he had spent his whole life expecting betrayal and simply filed mine under a different category. When I returned to the service station for a fresh bottle of sparkling water, I saw one of the bussers whispering to another server. Both of them glanced toward the curtained alcove, then quickly away. Something had shifted. The room felt tighter, more watchful. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination, but the lie did not hold. "Who is he?" I asked Maria under my breath as we crossed paths near the kitchen doors. She froze just long enough to tell me she knew exactly who I meant. "Do not ask questions about men like that," she whispered. "Especially not here." Then she kept walking. That was not an answer, but it was worse. By 11:30, the rain had turned harder, drumming against the windows in steady silver lines. My shift was supposed to end at midnight, but every glance at the clock made time feel slower. I checked my phone once during a break. 2 missed calls from my landlord. 1 text from my younger brother asking if I could help with our mom's prescription this week because his hours had been cut again. I stared at the message until the words blurred. Real life. Rent. Bills. Scrubs folded on the chair in my apartment for clinical rotation on Saturday. That was the life I understood. Not smoked glass and men who could have a stranger followed without ever raising their voice. I shoved the phone back into my apron and went to clear a table near the bar. That was when I saw him again. Not Damien, the man with the silver ring. He stood near the far end of the room, speaking quietly to one of the bartenders, his expression mild, almost pleasant. Average height, dark suit, hair clipped short, the kind of face your memory would slide off unless you had a reason to hold on. But now that I knew what I had seen, every ordinary detail about him felt wrong. He looked up, and for one impossible second his eyes met mine. No smile, no sign that he recognized me. Yet something cold uncurled in my stomach anyway. Then he turned and walked toward the back hallway reserved for staff and private exits. I did not realize I had stopped breathing until Maria bumped my shoulder with a stack of dessert plates. "Claire." Her voice was sharper now. "Do not stare." I nodded too fast. My hands felt clumsy. I nearly dropped the spoon while resetting table 6. At 11:48, Marco called last seating. At 11:52, the quartet packed up their instruments. At 11:56, the velvet curtain to the VIP alcove opened, and every sound near me seemed to soften without disappearing. Damien Moretti stepped out first. The men with him moved like they were part of the same thought, spreading just enough to clear his path without drawing attention to the fact that they were protecting him. He buttoned his coat as he walked, dark wool over charcoal wool, clean lines, and zero wasted motion. Conversations did not stop around him, but they changed shape. People lowered their voices. Some looked away too quickly. Others watched too carefully. Power did not need an introduction in places like this. It was felt. He did not glance left or right. He looked directly at me. I was standing beside the espresso station with a folded check presenter in my hand, caught out in the open like an actress who had missed her cue. He came close enough that I could catch the scent of rain and cedar from his coat. Up close, he seemed taller than I remembered, though maybe that was just presence doing what inches could not. "You are still here," he said. Not surprised. Confirming. My throat felt dry. "I am still on shift." One corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. Not for much longer. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and placed something beside the espresso cups. A business card. Heavy white stock. No logo. No title. Just a name and a phone number embossed in black. Damien Moretti. "Take a car home tonight," he said. "Do not take the subway. Do not walk alone. And if anyone approaches you before you get inside your apartment, you call me." I stared at the card, then back at him. "Why would I call you?" His eyes held mine, unreadable and absolute. "Because the man who touched my drink left 5 minutes ago through the staff exit." He let that settle between us, then added softly. "And because he looked back before he left. At you." The card felt heavier than paper should have. I stood there staring at Damien Moretti's name while the espresso machine hissed beside me, and the rest of Belafonte's slipped toward closing like this was any other night. The man who touched my drink left 5 minutes ago through the staff exit. And because he looked back before he left. At you. I should have laughed. I should have handed the card back and told him I was not part of whatever private war rich men in tailored coats fought behind smoked glass. Instead, I slid the card into my apron pocket with fingers that did not feel entirely mine. "I can get home by myself," I said, because pride is a ridiculous thing to cling to when fear has already made a home in your chest. Damien studied me for a long second, his expression unreadable. "That is not the same thing as getting home safely." Then he stepped back, gave a slight nod to one of the men near the door, and walked out into the rain like the city had been built to part for him. The moment he left, the air rushed back into the room. Conversations resumed. Chairs scraped. Glassware clinked. But I could feel the change in the staff around me. People were careful not to look at me too directly. Marco avoided assigning me side work for the first time in my life. Maria pressed a folded takeout box into my hand without asking if I wanted it. "Go straight home," she whispered. "And Claire? Lock your door." I wanted to ask her how much she knew, but something in her face stopped me. Not fear exactly. Resignation. Like she had learned the hard way that some questions came with invoices you could not afford. I changed out of my apron in the staff room, pulled on my wool coat, and checked my phone. 12:23 a.m. Another message from my brother. Another reminder from my landlord. A weather alert about heavy rain and flash flooding in Lower Manhattan. Everything normal. Everything painfully ordinary. I held on to that as I pushed through the back employee entrance and stepped into the alley behind the restaurant. The cold hit first. Then the rain. Fine, needling drops blowing sideways under the security light. The alley smelled like wet concrete, coffee grounds, and car exhaust. I wrapped my coat tighter and scanned for the subway entrance a block away, already calculating how fast I could get there in shoes made for carrying trays, not outrunning trouble. A black sedan idled at the curb, sleek and quiet under the street lamp. I stopped walking. The rear passenger door opened before I could decide whether to turn around. One of Damien's men stepped out, umbrella already raised. "Miss Bennett," he said. Polite. Calm. "Mr. Moretti asked that I drive you home." The fact that he knew my last name made my stomach drop another inch. "No," I said too quickly. "Thank you, but no." He did not move closer. He did not argue. "Mr. Moretti was clear that you might refuse." That almost annoyed me enough to override my fear. Then he already has his answer. I stepped past him, into the rain, heading toward the mouth of the alley. My apartment was in Queens. One train downtown, one connection, 35 minutes if the late-night schedule behaved. I had done it hundreds of times. I had walked 3 blocks alone at 1 in the morning more times than I could count. I was not helpless. I was not some trembling extra in a story that belonged to powerful men. I made it to the corner before the feeling started. That quiet, unmistakable prickle at the back of my neck. Not a sound. Not footsteps. Just awareness. I glanced over my shoulder. The street looked almost empty. Rain silvered the sidewalks. A yellow cab rolled through the intersection. The black sedan was still at the curb, unmoving. For one second I thought I had imagined it. Then, across the street beneath the awning of a closed pharmacy, I saw him. Dark coat, hands in his pockets. Still as a photograph. The man with the silver ring. He was not looking at the restaurant anymore. He was looking at me. My breath caught so sharply it hurt. In that same instant, the sedan door opened again behind me and Damien's driver called out, not loudly, but with enough force to cut through the ring. "Miss Bennett, get in the car." The man across the street did not move. He did not need to. The message had already landed. He knew where I worked. He knew what I looked like. And now he knew I had chosen the wrong glass. My hand closed around the card in my pocket so tightly the edge bit into my palm. Pride lost the argument. I turned, crossed the rain-slick pavement in 3 quick steps, and ducked into the back seat of the black sedan. The leather was warm. The windows were dark. The door shut with a soft, expensive sound that felt far too final. As the car pulled away from the curb, I looked back through the rain-streaked glass. The man under the awning was still there, smaller now, almost blurred by distance and weather. But I could have sworn he smiled. Then the privacy screen slid up between me and the driver, and Damien Moretti's voice came through the speaker, low and perfectly controlled. "Now," he said, "you are going to tell me everything you saw." For 3 seconds, I could not speak. Rain whispered against the roof of the car. The city slid by in blurred gold and red through the tinted windows. All of Manhattan softened into watercolor streaks and expensive silence. I had never been inside a vehicle like this before. The leather smelled clean and warm, the kind of warm that came from money and planning and people who never had to sprint through a storm to catch the last train home. My reflection in the dark glass looked pale and strained, hair damp around my face, eyes too wide. "I saw someone touch your drink," I said finally, hearing how thin my voice sounded in the enclosed space. "A man standing behind you. Dark suit, silver ring on his right hand." He poured something into the glass when everyone else was distracted. Silence answered me for a beat. Then Damien's voice came through the speaker again, even and measured. "Did you see his face clearly?" "Yes." "Did he know that you saw him?" I thought of the moment at the bar, the stillness in his expression, the way he had looked at me from across the street with that terrible calm. "I think he does now." Another pause. Longer this time. I could picture Damien somewhere ahead of me in the city, listening without wasted motion, filing every detail into place. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said. So I did. I started with Marco sending me into the private alcove, with the tray, the whiskey, the ripple in the amber liquid. I told him about the ring, about the switch, about the way the man had stepped back like nothing at all had happened. When I finished, the car had turned onto the bridge, and below us the East River looked black under the rain, broken only by scattered lights trembling on the surface. "You were observant," Damien said. "Or reckless." The corner of my mouth tightened. "You keep saying that like there is a difference." For the first time, I heard something in his voice that almost sounded like amusement. "Almost. There is. Reckless people act without understanding consequences. Observant people act because they understand them faster than everyone else." I leaned back against the seat and let that sit between us. No one had ever accused me of being observant in a tone that sounded like respect. Usually it was words like overworked, stubborn, too independent for my own good. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Away from the route someone would expect you to take home." My stomach tightened. That is not an answer. It is the only one you need right now. I turned toward the privacy screen, even though I knew he could not see me through it. "You do not get to decide what I need." "Tonight," he said quietly, "I do." The arrogance of that should have made me furious. Instead, it made me grip the edge of the seat and stare harder at the rain-streaked city outside. Because part of me knew he was right, and I hated that almost as much as I hated being afraid. The sedan moved deeper into Queens, farther from the route I usually took, farther from the apartment above the laundromat where my life existed in practical little pieces. Cheap coffee, flashcards for pharmacology, shoes lined up by the door, the grocery list taped to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a lemon. Normal things. Safe things. Things that already felt oddly far away. "My apartment is in Astoria," I said. "I know." The answer came too fast. Of course he knew. He knew my last name before I had given it. He knew where I worked, where I was standing, when my shift ended. I should have been horrified. Instead, exhaustion made it all feel strangely inevitable. "That is unsettling," I muttered. It is meant to be reassuring. I let out a breath that might have been a laugh if the night had been different. For who? He did not answer. The car turned again, then slowed beneath the covered entrance of a residential building that did not belong anywhere near my tax bracket. 20 stories of dark glass and pale stone rose into the wet night. A uniformed doorman stepped forward before the car had even stopped. My heart kicked harder. This is not my apartment. No, Damien said. It is mine. Every muscle in my body went tight. Absolutely not. The door unlocked with a soft click. Miss Bennett, the driver said gently from the front seat. Mr. Moretti asked that I remind you the man from the restaurant now knows your face, your workplace, and your usual schedule. Your apartment has a street-level entrance and a broken security camera over the side alley. My blood ran cold. How do you know about the camera? Because I had it checked 10 minutes ago. That did it. The sheer scale of him. The speed. The fact that while I had been trying not to panic in the back seat, he had already reached into my life and learned things I had not even told my landlord. It should have felt violating. Maybe it did. But under that was something worse. Relief. I hated it on sight. The doorman stood under the awning with an umbrella, waiting. Rain streamed silver off the edge of the canopy. Somewhere far away, a siren rose and faded. One night, Damien said through the speaker, his tone as steady as ever. You stay here tonight. Tomorrow, if the risk changes, we reassess. Reassess, I repeated. Do you always talk like a contract? Only when I am trying to be polite. Despite everything, that almost pulled another laugh out of me. I pressed my damp palms against my knees and looked up at the tower of dark windows. Warm light glowed on the top floor. High enough to feel unreachable. Safe enough to be dangerous in a completely different way. I knew I should refuse. I knew every lesson women learn about self-preservation should have sent me in the opposite direction. But then I remembered the man under the pharmacy awning, watching me like he had all the time in the world. I remembered Maria telling me to lock my door. I remembered the broken security camera over the alley beside my building and the fact that Damien Moretti had known about it before I did. When I finally reached for the handle, my hand trembled only once. One night, I said. The rain hit harder when the door opened. The doorman stepped in with the umbrella, shielding me from the storm as I climbed out. And just before the privacy screen went dark again, Damien's voice came through one last time, low and absolute. Claire. I paused with one heel on the wet pavement. From this moment on, you do not go anywhere alone. The lobby was so quiet it made me uneasy. Not empty, just controlled. The marble floors reflected the chandelier light in long golden streaks, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the soft hum of an elevator rising through the building like a held breath. Everything smelled faintly of polished wood, rain, and money. The doorman guided me across the lobby with professional calm, never asking questions, never looking curious about the soaked waitress being escorted into a building where people probably had art collections worth more than my entire family had earned in a decade. That was the first thing I noticed about Damien Moretti's world. No one seemed surprised by anything. A private elevator opened without anyone pressing a visible button. One of the men from the restaurant was waiting inside, broad-shouldered, dark suit, expression neutral. He did not introduce himself. He only gave a slight nod and said, "This way, Miss Bennett." The elevator ride felt too smooth, too silent, too fast. My reflection in the mirrored wall looked like someone who had wandered into the wrong life by mistake. Damp blonde hair, cheap wool coat darkened by rain, tired eyes and sensible shoes. I clutched my bag a little tighter as the numbers climbed. When the doors opened, warmth hit me first, then light. The penthouse stretched out in pale stone, dark wood, and windows so tall they made the city look like something framed and owned. Manhattan glittered beyond the glass, each building cut in silver and gold. Against the storm-dark sky, somewhere below, traffic moved in soft ribbons of red and white. Up here, the rain looked decorative instead of cold. "You can leave your coat," the man said. I kept it on. He did not argue. He led me through a living room bigger than my entire apartment, past a dining table set for no one, past shelves lined with books that looked chosen instead of displayed, and into a guest suite at the end of a quiet hallway. The room was the size of my living room and bedroom combined. A bed with a gray cashmere throw, a reading chair by the window, a bathroom with white stone counters and folded towels stacked like a hotel display. On the dresser sat a shopping bag from a luxury department store and a glass of water already poured. I stopped in the doorway. "What is this?" "A change of clothes," he said. "Mr. Moretti thought you might not want to sleep in wet things." That irritated me more than it should have. The precision of it. The fact that he had anticipated a need before I had spoken it out loud. Does he always plan this far ahead? The man's expression did not shift. Yes. Then he left, closing the door behind him with quiet finality. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the hush of the room and the faint percussion of rain against the glass. Then I crossed to the shopping bag and looked inside. Soft gray sweatpants, a cream sweater, a toothbrush still in the box, skincare unopened, socks, even a brush. Everything in my size, or close enough to make the difference meaningless. My chest tightened with something I did not want to examine too closely. Not gratitude exactly. Something more dangerous. The feeling of being noticed. I changed because staying damp and stubborn felt childish after a certain point. The sweater was softer than anything I owned. The sweatpants fit like they had been chosen by someone with access to far too much information. I washed my face in the marble bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror afterward. Without makeup, without my uniform, without the armor of busyness, I looked younger than I felt. More uncertain too. I was tying my damp hair back when there was a soft knock at the door. I opened it to find a woman in a black dress carrying a tray with tea, soup, and a sandwich cut neatly into halves. "Compliments of Mr. Moretti," she said. "He asked that you eat." I almost said I was not hungry, but the smell of roasted tomato and basil hit me at exactly the wrong moment and betrayed me. "Thank you," I said instead. She gave a polite nod and left. I sat by the window with the tray balanced on my knees, looking out at the city while steam curled from the tea. I had not realized how cold I was until that first sip spread warmth through my chest. The sandwich was turkey and provolone on fresh sourdough. The soup tasted like it had come from a real kitchen, not a microwave or a takeout container balanced on my lap after a double shift. It felt almost absurd to be comforted inside a stranger's penthouse, while the rest of my life sat across the river in a fourth-floor walk-up with thin walls and stubborn radiators. My phone buzzed in my bag, making me jump hard enough to spill tea onto the saucer. I fumbled it out. "My younger brother, Evan." I answered immediately. "Claire? Thank God. I saw the weather alert, and then you did not text back. Are you home?" I looked around the guest suite with its silent luxury and city view and said the only thing I could say without turning his worry into panic. "I am safe." "You sound weird." "I am tired." That, at least, was true. He hesitated. "Mom is asleep. Do not worry about the prescription. I will figure it out." Guilt rose sharp and familiar. "No, you will not." I said I would help. "Claire." His voice softened. "You cannot keep carrying everybody." I closed my eyes. In another life, maybe that sentence would have made me cry. Tonight, it only made me tired enough to tell the truth. "I know." We spoke for another minute. Normal things. Our mother. His schedule. Whether the leak in the kitchen ceiling had gotten worse. When I hung up, the quiet of the penthouse felt even larger around me. I set the phone down and turned back toward the windows just as movement caught my eye in the glass reflection behind me. I froze. Damian Moretti stood in the open doorway, jacket gone, white shirt rolled once at the sleeves, watching me with the same impossible stillness he had carried through the restaurant. I had not heard the door open. I had not heard him walk in. He glanced at the half-empty tray in my lap, then at the tea, then finally met my eyes. "Good," he said softly. "You ate." I set the tray down too quickly, and the spoon rattled against the china in the quiet room. Damian did not flinch at the sound. He just stood there in the doorway, one hand resting lightly against the frame, like he had all the time in the world and none of it belonged to anyone else. Without the jacket, he looked less formal and somehow more dangerous. The white shirt softened nothing. It only made the control in him more obvious, the same way silence can make a room feel louder. "You should knock louder," I said, because it was either that or admit my heart had jumped into my throat. One dark eyebrow lifted. I did knock. "Then your penthouse is too quiet." "That is intentional." Of course it was. Everything about this place felt intentional. The light, the temperature, the tray arriving exactly when I was cold enough to need it, the clothes waiting in my size. Even the city outside seemed curated from up here, reduced to distance and light and harmless weather. Damian stepped into the room at last, closing the door behind him with a quiet click. He glanced once toward the windows, then back at me. "How is your brother?" The question caught me off guard. "You heard that." "I was not trying to," he said. "But yes." I folded my arms, more for steadiness than defense. "He is fine." "And your mother?" I stared at him. "Do you make a habit of knowing everything about people before they know anything about you?" "Only when their safety depends on what I know." The answer was infuriating because it was so calm, so reasonable, like I was the difficult one for objecting. "That is not normal," I said. "Neither is someone trying to tamper with my drink in a private room of a restaurant that screens every reservation." His tone did not rise. It did not need to. The truth of it landed anyway. I looked away first, toward the city beyond the glass. Rain still traced silver lines down the windows, blurring Queens in the distance into a soft electric haze. Somewhere over there was my apartment, my real clothes, my textbooks, my ordinary life sitting open and unattended. "I need to call work in the morning," I said, "and my clinical supervisor. And I am supposed to help my mother tomorrow afternoon. Your supervisor will be informed there was a family emergency." I turned back so fast my damp hair brushed my cheek. No, he was still for a beat. "No, you do not get to decide things for me because you have expensive security and a view." Something unreadable moved in his eyes. Not anger. Not exactly. More like surprise that I had pushed back at all. "Miss Bennett," he said. "Tonight a man inside my circle made a move that should not have been possible. Another man left that same room knowing you intervened. I am trying to keep your life intact. By taking control of it. By preventing other people from taking it from you." The room went very quiet after that. I hated how effective he was when he chose a sentence carefully. I hated even more that some part of me understood the difference. He walked farther in, stopping near the chair by the window instead of crowding me. That should not have mattered, but it did. He gave me space like he knew exactly how much pressure I could stand before I bolted. "You are angry," he said. "You should be. This was not your world yesterday. It is still not my world." "No," he said softly. "But someone has decided to drag you to its edge." I swallowed. Who was he? I do not know yet. That is not a comforting answer. It is an honest one. He slipped a phone from his pocket, glanced at the screen, then set it face down on the dresser without checking whatever message had come in. The gesture was small, but it felt deliberate. Like for 1 minute he wanted me to know I had his attention. "Tell me something," I said. "Why did you trust me?" A faint line appeared between his brows. "At the restaurant." My voice came out quieter now. "You understood what I did. You knew I switched the glass. You could have assumed I was part of it. A distraction. A setup. But you did not." He held my gaze. For a long moment. "No, why not?" The city hummed below us. Rain whispered against the glass. When he finally answered, his voice was lower than before, stripped of some polished edge I had gotten used to hearing. "Because when people lie to save themselves, they watch the room." He took one step closer, not enough to frighten, just enough to narrow the distance. "You watched the glass. That should not have done anything to me." It should not have mattered that he had noticed something so small, or that he had remembered it with that kind of precision. But warmth moved through my chest anyway, dangerous and uninvited. I looked down at my hands. I almost said nothing. "But you did not." "It was instinct." "No," he said. "It was character." I let out a slow breath and hated how much that landed. No one had called me brave in years. Responsible, yes. Reliable. The one who can handle it. But not brave. Not like it was something soft and sharp and worth seeing. Damien's phone buzzed once against the dresser. He ignored it again. "You should sleep," he said. "You have been running on adrenaline for hours." "And you?" "I do not sleep much." That sounds miserable. This time I did see it. The smallest ghost of a smile. There and gone so fast I almost thought I imagined it. "Sometimes." He turned toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. "Claire." Something in the way he said my name made me look up immediately. "The guard outside your door is for your protection, not your confinement. If you need anything, ask." "Anything. Within reason." That sounds like a lawyer wrote it. "No," he said, and now the hint of a smile was real enough to reach his eyes for half a second. "A man who has learned the price of vague promises wrote it." He opened the door, but before stepping out, he looked back at me one last time. All the warmth was gone from his expression again, replaced by that cool certainty that seemed built into his bones. "Lock the door after me," he said. "Tomorrow, I show you why I did not let you go home." I locked the door after Damien left, then stood there with my hand still on the handle, like the metal might explain something the man himself had not. Tomorrow, I show you why I did not let you go home. I should have ignored that. I should have taken the guarded room, the dry clothes, the impossible quiet, and treated it like what it was, temporary shelter in a night gone wrong. Instead, his words followed me into sleep. Or what passed for sleep. I drifted in and out under a blanket softer than anything I owned, half aware of rain against the windows and the foreign silence of a place where pipes did not knock and neighbors did not argue through thin walls. When I finally woke, pale winter light had replaced the storm. For one disoriented second, I thought I was late for class. Then I saw the skyline outside the window and remembered everything at once. My pulse spiked hard enough to make me sit up too fast. The room was warm. My phone sat charging on the nightstand beside a folded note written in precise black ink. Breakfast at 8. We leave at 9. Wear comfortable shoes. No signature. None needed. I stared at the note for a second, then let out a breath that might have been annoyance or disbelief. Of course, he left instructions like the day was already decided. The bathroom held more things than there had been the night before. A sealed toothbrush and a better brand than I had ever bought for myself. A hair tie, moisturizer, even makeup remover, though I had not been wearing any by the time I came upstairs. Someone had thought of details I usually had to remember for myself, and the realization landed strangely. Not soft, not comforting, just disorienting. I dressed in the same borrowed clothes from last night because there was nothing else to wear, brushed my hair, and opened the bedroom door. A man in a dark suit stood a respectful distance down the hall, hands loosely folded in front of him. Guard. Protection, not confinement. Right. Good morning, Miss Bennett, he said. Mr. Moretti is in the dining room. I hated how quickly I was getting used to being expected somewhere. The penthouse looked different in daylight. Less shadow, more glass. The city beyond the windows was sharp now, every rooftop and water tower cut clean against a pale gray sky. The dining room table held one place setting. White china, silver coffee service, fresh fruit, scrambled eggs, toast, and a small vase with white flowers that looked too delicate for a place built on control. Damien stood at the far end of the room by the windows, phone in one hand, free hand in his pocket. He had changed into a charcoal sweater and dark trousers, no tie, no jacket, no visible effort, and still somehow more put together than anyone I knew on their best day. When he turned at the sound of my steps, his gaze flicked over me once, quick and assessing. You slept, he said. A little. Good. He ended the call without another word, set the phone down, and crossed to the table. Eat. I pulled out the chair across from him and sat, more because my body wanted the coffee than because I liked being told what to do. The first sip was hot and strong and so good, it almost made me forgive him for existing with that level of confidence before 8 in the morning. Almost. He sat opposite me, not eating, just watching in that unervingly quiet way of his. This is strange, I said after a minute. Breakfast. Being in a penthouse with a man I met less than 12 hours ago while he watches me eat eggs like there is a test I do not know I am taking. For half a second, something like amusement touched his mouth. There is no test. That is exactly what someone giving a test would say. This time the corner of his mouth did move. Barely, but enough that I noticed, and enough that I resented noticing. I set my coffee down. You said you were going to show me why I could not go home. I am. Where? Your apartment. My fork paused halfway to the plate. What? You wanted answers. I prefer evidence. I should have refused on principle. Instead, I ate 2 more bites and finished half the coffee, because some stubborn part of me did not want him to think I was fragile just because my stomach had been in a knot since midnight. By 9, I was in the private elevator with Damien and one of his guards, riding down through polished silence with my pulse climbing for reasons I did not want to name. The black sedan waiting outside was not the one from last night. Different driver. Same tinted windows. Same feeling of being enclosed inside someone else's power. Damien sat beside me in the back, one leg crossed over the other, reading something on his phone while the city moved around us. He did not fill silence for the sake of comfort. He let it exist. Oddly, that was easier than small talk would have been. As we crossed into Queens, the streets changed. Less glass, more brick. More deli awnings, laundromats, corner stores with hand-lettered signs in the windows. Real life. My life. The closer we got to Vistoria, the tighter my chest felt. Not because I was happy to be back, because I was suddenly afraid of what I would see. The car slowed on my block and stopped half a building down from my apartment. Damien looked up from his phone and slipped it into his coat pocket. "Do not get out yet," he said. Through the window, my building looked exactly the same. 4 stories of tired brick over a laundromat with a flickering blue sign. Fire escape rusting down one side. 2 flower pots on the upstairs windowsill where Mrs. Alvarez from 4B grew herbs every spring. Ordinary. Harmless. Home. "I do not understand," I said. Damien gestured toward the side alley with a slight tilt of his head. "Look closer." At first I saw nothing. Wet pavement. Dumpster. The broken security camera over the service door, exactly where he had said it would be. Then my eyes adjusted. A man stood just inside the alley's shadow, half hidden by the brick corner. Dark coat. Still posture. Watching my building like patience was a profession. Even through the rain-dulled glass and the distance, I knew him. Silver ring. My breath stopped. "He has been there since 6:42 this morning," Damien said quietly, "waiting to see if you came home." For a second, I forgot how to breathe. The world outside the window did not change. Cars still rolled past the intersection. Someone in a puffy red coat came out of the deli on the corner balancing a paper cup and a bagel. Mrs. Alvarez's herb pots still sat on the upstairs sill like stubborn little proof that life kept going. But all I could see was the man in the alley. Waiting. Watching. At my building. My throat went dry. "How long did you say?" I asked, though I had heard him perfectly. Damien kept his gaze on the alley, his voice quiet and exact. "Since 6:42. My fingers tightened in my lap until my knuckles hurt. 6:42 in the morning. Hours. That meant while I had been sleeping in borrowed cashmere and drinking coffee out of thin porcelain, someone had been outside my apartment watching for me to come home. The thought made something cold and shaky move through my chest. "You are sure it is him?" I asked. Damien turned his head slightly and looked at me, not with impatience, but with the same calm certainty that somehow made everything more real. "Yes." I stared back out the window. The man had not moved much. He did not need to. He had chosen a spot with a clear line of sight to the front steps and partial cover from the alley wall. Patient. Professional. He looked like part of the street until you knew what to look for. "How did you find him?" "I had your building watched before sunrise." "Because you thought he would come here?" "Because if I were trying to identify a witness, I would start with routine. Home. Work. Family." The word family hit harder than the others. My stomach dropped. "My mother." The words came out sharper than I intended. "My brother." Damien's expression changed so subtly most people would not have seen it. Something in his face closed and focused at once, like a door locking. "Your mother is not at your apartment." "No, but Evan knows where I am. He calls. He visits." Panic arrived quietly, which I think is worse than when it arrives all at once. It did not scream. It just spread. Fast and efficient. "I need to call him." "You will," Damien said. From a secured line. I turned to him, anger flaring up through the fear because anger was easier to stand inside. "Stop doing that." "Doing what?" "Saying things like decisions are already made." His eyes held mine, steady and impossible. "Claire, while you were serving tables last night, you were pulled into a situation that was already in motion. I am not trying to control you. I am trying to stay ahead of men who do not hesitate." That sounds like control with better tailoring. One of his brows lifted. Any other man might have looked offended. Damien looked almost thoughtful. "Maybe," he said, "but it is keeping you alive." I looked away first because I hated how unfairly effective that answer was. Outside, the man in the alley shifted his weight, just enough to glance toward the laundromat entrance before settling again. The movement was ordinary. Human. That was what made it frightening. Monsters in real life rarely looked like monsters. They looked like men you would pass on the sidewalk without a second thought. "What happens now?" I asked. Damien reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Plain. Cream-colored. He handed it to me without explanation. Inside was a printed photo. My apartment door. Taken from across the street. Time stamped 7:11 a.m. Another photo showed the alley. Same man. Same dark coat. Same silver ring catching light on his right hand as he checked his watch. My pulse stumbled. There was one more image beneath the others. My building entrance from last night, taken at 12:58 a.m. Empty steps. Wet pavement. a shadow near the corner that I would never have noticed if it had not been frozen and handed to me on paper. He was there last night too. I whispered. Yes. He followed the car? No. He was already on your block before our driver left the restaurant. I looked up so fast the photos crinkled in my hand. What does that mean? Damien's voice lost some of its softness. Not harsh, just colder. It means the poisoned drink may not have been the only plan in motion. The city outside suddenly felt much farther away, like I was looking at it through museum glass instead of a car window. You think they were watching me before I even left work? I think they were prepared for multiple outcomes. And one of those outcomes was me. Saying it out loud made something in me go still. Damien did not soften the truth. Yes. I leaned back against the seat and closed my eyes for 1 second, no longer, because if I kept them shut too long I might come apart. My life had always been practical. Messy, yes. Exhausting, absolutely. But practical. Bills. Schedules. Clinical hours. Remembering my mother's medication and my brother's overtime shifts, and whether there was enough gas in the car if I borrowed his on Sundays. I knew how to survive ordinary problems. This was not ordinary. This was a man in an alley at sunrise waiting to see if I walked into my own front door. Claire. Damien's voice dropped, quieter now. I opened my eyes. He was watching me in that still, unsparing way of his. But there was something else under it this time. Not pity. He would have hated pity. Something closer to attention sharpened by concern. Look at me. I did. You are not going back here, he said. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not until I know exactly who is behind this. The words should have felt like a sentence. Instead, they landed like the first solid thing I had touched since midnight. I hated that too. And my family? I asked. Your brother gets a new phone before noon. Your mother's building gets covered. Quietly. Covered, I repeated. You really do talk like a contract. Occupational hazard. Under any other circumstances, that might have made me smile. Instead, I looked down at the photos in my hand and said the only honest thing left. I did not ask for any of this. Damien's gaze did not waver. I know, and I do not belong in your world. Something unreadable moved across his face. Brief. Gone almost instantly. No, he said softly. You belong in a world where men do not wait outside your home because you chose to do the right thing. That should have sounded idealistic coming from a man like him. It did not. It sounded personal, which was worse in a way I could not explain. My fingers loosened around the envelope. Outside, the man in the alley finally looked up, scanning the street with the bored patience of someone confident he had time. He did not see us behind the tinted glass. He did not know I was watching him back. Damien reached forward and tapped once on the privacy panel. The driver pulled away from the curb without fanfare, smooth and silent. The alley slipped out of view. My building followed. I watched it disappear until all that remained in the window was a blur of Queen's storefronts and the pale winter sky. Where are we going? I asked. Damien's answer came without hesitation. Somewhere he cannot reach you. Then, after the briefest pause, he added in that same low, controlled voice. And somewhere you start telling me every detail you remember about the man with the silver ring. The car did. Not go back to Manhattan. Instead, we crossed deeper into Queens, then turned onto a quieter street lined with brick townhouses and bare winter trees dripping from the morning rain. The neighborhood looked almost aggressively normal. Clean sidewalks, brownstones with polished black railings, a bakery on the corner with hand-painted lettering on the window, and 2 women inside laughing over coffee like nothing dangerous had ever touched this block. The sedan pulled into a narrow private drive beside a 4-story limestone building that looked too elegant to attract attention and too discreet to invite questions. No sign. No visible security cameras, though I knew enough now to assume that meant there were many. Where are we? I asked. A place I use when privacy matters, Damien said. The answer should not have irritated me anymore, but somehow it still did. Do all your answers come in polished little half-truths? He glanced at me as the driver came around to open the door. Only when full ones would put more people at risk. That shut me up, mostly because I was beginning to realize he never dodged a question for sport. Only for calculation. Inside, the building felt different from the penthouse. Less luxury on display, more quiet purpose. The floors were old hardwood instead of polished stone. The walls held framed black and white photographs of New York from another era. A woman at the front desk looked up from a ledger, took one look at Damien, then at me, and immediately stood. "Third floor is ready," she said. No curiosity, no hesitation, just efficiency wrapped in perfect manners. The apartment upstairs was smaller than the penthouse, but somehow easier to breathe in. A sitting room with cream walls, a navy sofa, a fireplace with no fire lit, a kitchen that looked used, not staged, a bookshelf half full, fresh flowers on the table, not arranged to impress anyone. Temporary, I thought, but also lived in some way I could not explain. Damien shrugged off his coat and draped it over the back of a chair. "Sit. You really do enjoy giving instructions." "I enjoy keeping things clear." "Those are not the same thing." "Today they are." I hated that he could say things like that without sounding defensive. Like certainty was just another language he spoke better than everyone else. Still, I sat. He remained standing for a moment, studying me with that unnerving steadiness, then moved to the kitchen and returned with a leather folio and 2 cups of coffee. He placed one in front of me exactly the way he had at breakfast, as if feeding and caffeinating me had somehow become part of his strategy. "Tell me everything you remember," he said. Not what seemed important. Everything. I wrapped my hands around the cup, grateful for the heat, even if I refused to say so. Then I closed my eyes for a second and pictured the private dining alcove at Belafonte's. The lighting, the tray, the table. "He was standing behind you and to the left," I said slowly. "Not too close. Close enough to step in without drawing attention. Early 30s, maybe. Dark hair cut short. Clean shaven. Gray tie. Silver ring on his right hand. Not a wedding band. Larger. Flat on top. Maybe engraved, but I could not see clearly." Damien opened the folio. Inside were photographs. Not of the alley this time. Men. Headshots, some candid, some formal, spread across several plastic sleeves. "Do not rush," he said. "Take your time." My pulse picked up. "What is this?" "Men with access to that room last night. Staff, private security, outside contractors, and a few names I do not yet trust enough to exclude." I looked up sharply. "You think it was someone close to you?" His expression did not change. "I think poison drinks do not happen by accident in rooms that are meant to be controlled." There it was again. The stripped-down honesty that made it impossible to pretend this was a misunderstanding. I lowered my gaze to the photographs. Faces blurred together at first. Men in suits. Men with careful haircuts and expensive indifference. Men who looked like they had learned not to reveal anything unless they chose to. I moved one photo aside. Then another. No, another. No, my fingers paused over the 4th sleeve. Not because I was sure. Because something about the angle tugged at memory. The line of the jaw. The shoulders. Wait. Damien did not speak. He only leaned one hand against the back of the opposite chair and watched me. I slid the photo free. Candid shot. The man was getting into a car, head turned slightly away from the camera. Enough to show the shape of his profile and the silver flash on his right hand. "This one," I said. My voice came out low. "I think this is him." Damien took the photo from me and looked at it once. Not surprise. Not uncertainty. Recognition, immediate and cold. "Matteo Voss," he said. "Who is he?" "He was hired 3 months ago to oversee external logistics." "Was?" I asked. "He still is," Damien said. "For the moment." I stared at him. "You suspected him already." "I suspected several people already. And you brought me here to identify one of them." "Yes." I should have been offended by that. Used, even. But instead I felt something else entirely. A small, sharp flicker of anger on his behalf. Because the calm in Damien's voice could not hide what betrayal had cost him. "Then the drink was personal," I said. Damien's gaze shifted from the photo to me. "No," he said quietly. "That is the problem." I frowned. "What does that mean?" He set the photograph down on the table between us. "It means the drink was not the objective. It was a test." The room seemed to contract around that sentence. I forgot the coffee in my hands. A test for what? To see who would notice. To see how quickly I would react. To see whether someone outside my circle could be turned into leverage. He let the last word sit there with deliberate weight. My stomach dropped. "Me? Yes. You think they wanted a witness. I think they wanted an opening." He moved then, not pacing, not restless, just crossing to the window with the kind of controlled energy that suggested his mind was already 10 moves ahead. Winter light caught the side of his face, sharpening it. "If the glass had reached me untouched," he said, "the result would have been simple and final." He looked back at me, but it did not. You changed the outcome. Now they need to know whether you are random, useful, or dangerous. I stared at him, every practical part of my mind trying and failing to file that under something survivable. I am a waitress in nursing school. And yet here we are. That is not funny. It was not meant to be. Silence fell for a beat. Then I asked the question that had been building in me since he laid the photo on the table. If this was a test, why do I feel like I am the one being measured? Something in Damien's expression shifted. Softer maybe, or maybe just more honest. Because you are. He came back to the table and stopped across from me, close enough that I could see the faint shadows of fatigue under his eyes for the first time. Not by me, Claire. His voice dropped lower. By people who now know one dangerous thing about you. What? He held my gaze, steady as ever. That when a room full of trained men missed what mattered, you did not. The words stayed with me longer than they should have. When a room full of trained men missed what mattered, you did not. I should have dismissed it as manipulation. A calculated line from a man who understood exactly how to move people where he wanted them. But the problem was that Damien did not say things like other men did. He never seemed to waste language on charm for its own sake. If he said something, it landed because he meant it. I looked away first, down at the photograph of Matteo Voss on the table, and tried to steady my breathing around that fact. Then what now? I asked. Damien rested both hands lightly on the back of the chair across from me. Now we find out whether Matteo was acting alone. And if he was not, then I find out who gave him confidence. The calm way he said it should have chilled me. Instead, it made the whole room feel sharper, more real. Outside the townhouse windows, the street looked almost peaceful. A delivery truck rolled by. Somewhere downstairs, a door opened and closed. The city kept going, indifferent as ever. I remember something else, I said suddenly. Damien's attention snapped back to me so quickly it felt physical. Tell me. I closed my eyes for a moment and returned to Belafonte's in my mind. The white tablecloth, the gold light, the polished whiskey bottle in my hand. He was not the only one who looked wrong. Damien said nothing, which was somehow the best way to get me to keep talking. At first I thought it was just nerves. But there was a bartender near the back station, not our regular one. Belafonte's keeps the same late shift on Thursdays. Marco is obsessive about consistency in the VIP rooms. But that man was new. Damien's expression changed by half a degree. Describe him. Tall. Maybe 6 feet 2. Black shirt, black vest like the others, but his sleeves were too long. He kept adjusting his cuffs. And he held the shaker in his left hand, but reached for garnishes with his right like he was trying to remember how the station was set up. Damien straightened slowly. You noticed hand deadness. I frowned. I noticed he looked uncomfortable. No, he said quietly. You noticed something more precise than that. I opened my mouth to argue, then stopped. Because he was right. I had noticed it without realizing I was doing it. The same way I noticed when patients in clinical rotation said they were fine while holding themselves like pain was stitched into their shoulders. He also did not make eye contact with staff, I added. People who actually work restaurants always make eye contact. We are always silently asking each other for something. More glasses. Help with table 12. Is the kitchen behind? He never did that. He looked at the room like a guest pretending not to be one. Damien picked up his phone at once. Luca, he said when the call connected. I need the full staff list from Belafonte's, including replacements and agency hires for last night. I also want security footage from the rear bar station between 10:30 and midnight. He listened for a moment, eyes on me the entire time. No, do not alert anyone yet. Quietly, he ended the call and set the phone down again. That matters, he said. So Matteo was not alone. That is what I am beginning to think. Something hot and unwelcome sparked through me. Not fear this time. Frustration. Then why were all the questions about me? I asked. Why does it feel like everyone is circling the waitress instead of the men who actually did this? Damien held my gaze for a long second. Because the waitress is the variable they did not plan for. I stood before I could think better of it, coffee forgotten on the table. Then stop treating me like something fragile you need to tuck into a safe house, and let me help. The words were out before I could soften them. The room went still. Damien did not look angry. If anything, he looked more focused. You are helping. No, I am being moved around. Like luggage with opinions. One of his brows lifted slightly. That is a memorable description. It is also accurate. To my surprise, that almost drew the ghost of a smile from him. Almost. Then it vanished, replaced by something more serious. Claire. He said my name the way he did when he wanted me to stop reacting and actually hear him. If I put you closer to this, I increase the risk. If you keep me in the dark, I stay scared and useless. The truth of that hung between us harder than I expected. Damien studied me with that unnerving stillness of his, and for the first time I had the sense that he was not deciding what to do with the situation. He was deciding what to do with me. You are neither scared nor useless, he said at last. You are angry. Yes. Good. I blinked. Good. Anger sharpens some people. Fear dulls them. I would rather know which one you become. I should not have liked that answer. I definitely should not have liked the respect in it. But I did. Enough to stay standing instead of sitting back down like I had been dismissed. Damien moved around the table then, not invading my space, just closing the distance enough that the room felt smaller. There is something else I need from you, he said. What? I need you to go back through the entire night with me. Every table you served. Every face that looked twice at you. Every change in routine. Not because I doubt you. His eyes held mine, dark and exact. Because I think you saw more than you know. My pulse kicked once hard. Not fear exactly. Recognition. Because beneath all the money and control and carefully chosen words, Damien Moretti was doing something almost no one ever did. He was trusting the way I noticed the world. I drew a slow breath and nodded once. Fine, I said. But if I am doing this, you stop giving me half-truths. A beat passed. Then another. Within reason, he said. I almost laughed. That is still your favorite phrase, is not it? It is practical. It is infuriating. This time the smile actually appeared. Brief. Sharp. Gone too soon to be gentle. Then we are making progress. He reached for the folio again and slid a blank notepad toward me across the table. Start at the beginning, he said. And Claire. I looked up. Do not leave out the details you think are too small. By noon, the dining table looked less like breakfast and more like an evidence board built by someone with expensive taste. Photographs. Staff rosters. A floor plan of Belafonte's printed on cream paper. My handwriting in the margins. Messier by the minute as I tried to drag every detail out of memory before it could blur into instinct and disappear. Damien had moved to the other side of the table an hour ago, sleeves still rolled, coffee gone cold near his elbow, attention fixed on me with a level of patience I would not have expected from a man whose entire life seemed built on speed and control. The woman at table 6 sent back her martini twice, I said, tapping the floor plan with the end of the pen. Not because anything was wrong with it. She wanted attention. She kept pulling the bartender over. That meant the back station got crowded around 11:15. Damien glanced at the printed timeline Luca had sent over. And Matteo touched the drink at 11:19. Right? Which means whoever was covering that bar only needed a small distraction. Not a huge one. Just enough to make routine look messy. Damien leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing in thought. A manufactured inconvenience. Exactly. The word came out before I realized I sounded pleased, and that annoyed me. Not because I did not want to be useful, because part of me had started forgetting I was supposed to distrust him. I looked down at the table and forced myself to focus. There was also a missing bottle, I said. What? Not missing. Replaced. He went still. Explain. I pointed to the back service station on the floor plan. Belafonte keeps premium whiskey grouped by label and height, because Marco is a control freak. The bottle I carried into your room looked right at first glance, but the seal had already been broken too cleanly. Like someone opened it carefully and set it back to look untouched. Damien said nothing. He did not need to. His silence sharpened the room. I did not think about it at the time, I admitted. I just remember noticing the cap was turned slightly off-center when I picked it up. I thought Marco had opened it earlier. Damien's gaze stayed on me for one long second. Then he picked up his phone. Luca, he said when the line connected. Pull inventory from Belafonte's premium bar stock for last night. I want bottle movement, replacements, and anything manually comped between 10 and midnight. Start with whiskey service in the private room. He listened, expression cooling by the second. And Luca? Check who signed off on the bottle opening log. He ended the call and set the phone down with care. That helps, he said. So do not act surprised that I want in. The words came out sharper than I intended, but not by much. Damien's eyes lifted to mine. You are in. That is not what this feels like. What does it feel like? I let out a breath through my nose. Like I am being tolerated until you can solve this without me. Something unreadable crossed his face. That is not what I am doing. Then what are you doing? He did not answer right away. Outside, a pale patch of sunlight tried and failed to break through the winter clouds. Somewhere in the building, footsteps passed down the hall, then faded. The townhouse settled around us in quiet layers. Finally, Damien said, adjusting. I frowned. To what? He held my gaze a beat too long to be casual. To the fact that you are not where I expected you to be. In your world. At this table. The honesty of it landed harder than it should have. I looked down at the pen in my hand because that suddenly felt easier than looking at him. Well, I said, aiming for light and missing by a little. I am still in borrowed clothes, so I do not think any of us expected this. That did it. A small breath of laughter left him. Real this time. Low and brief, but unmistakably real. The sound changed the room in a way I was not prepared for. It made him seem younger for half a second. Less like a force of nature. More like a man who had not expected to laugh either. No, he said. I did not. Before I could answer, his phone buzzed again. He checked the screen, and whatever he saw erased the last trace of warmth from his face. What? I asked. He stood immediately. Security footage. My pulse kicked. Up. From Belafonte's? Yes. He crossed to the television mounted above the fireplace and connected his phone with 2 efficient movements. Grainy black and white footage filled the screen. The back bar. Timestamp in the corner. Staff moving in practice lines, trays passing, bottles lifted and replaced. I stepped closer without meaning to. Damien paused the image and pointed. There. The bartender I had noticed. Tall. Slightly off in the shoulders. Sleeves too long. Even on grainy footage, he looked like someone wearing the idea of the job instead of the job itself. Damien pressed play. The man moved with careful hesitation until a server passed in front of the camera. 1 second of blocked view. Then Mateo appeared at the edge of the frame, crossing toward the private room corridor. The bartender reached under the station. Mateo did not look at him. Did not need to. A bottle changed hands below the counter line, hidden from the room and almost hidden from the camera. When the server moved on, both men were already back in position. My skin went cold. They rehearsed it, I whispered. Damien's jaw tightened once. Yes. The footage kept rolling. At 11:17, the woman from table 6 waved her arm dramatically and sent her drink back. The bartender stepped out, occupied exactly where he needed to be. 2 minutes later, I appeared on screen at the edge of the frame, collecting the whiskey service tray. My own face looked tired, distracted, ordinary. I watched myself straighten the glasses and lift the tray. Watched myself walk directly into a trap I had not known existed. Damien stopped the video before I disappeared into the corridor. The room fell silent. You were right, he said. I swallowed. About what? About the bottle. About the distraction. About all of it. His voice was quiet now, stripped of formality. You did not just notice a problem, Claire. You saw the structure underneath it. I should have felt triumphant, useful, maybe even proud. Instead, something more complicated moved through me. Because he believed me. Not politely. Not strategically. Fully. And after a lifetime of being the dependable one instead of the remarkable one, that kind of recognition hit a place in me I had kept practical for years. I turned away from the screen and braced one hand on the table. So what now? Damien did not answer immediately. When I looked up, he was watching me with that same impossible steadiness, but there was a new edge to it. Not colder. Closer. Now, he said. I stop assuming they will wait for another opportunity. A knock sounded at the townhouse door. Not frantic. Not loud. Just precise. Every line of Damien's body changed at once. The warmth vanished. The stillness sharpened. He looked toward the hall, then back at me. Go into the study and lock the door. My heartbeat stumbled. Why? Another knock. Same measured rhythm. Damien's voice dropped, low and absolute. Because no one outside my circle should know you are here. I did not argue. Whatever I might have said died the moment I saw Damien's face. It was not fear. Men like him probably had parts of themselves that no longer remembered how to fear in ways ordinary people understood. But it was alertness sharpened down to a blade. I moved fast, crossing the sitting room with the notepad still in my hand, and slipping into the study just as the knock came again. The room was smaller than the rest of the townhouse, lined with dark shelves and one wide desk facing a tall window. I locked the door, then stood there in the silence with my pulse beating hard in my throat. Through the wood, I could hear almost nothing. Low voices, a door opening, then the quiet murmur of people who already knew how not to be overheard. It should have made me feel safer. Instead, it made everything worse. Silence leaves too much room for imagination. I crossed to the desk and set the notepad down, then immediately picked it back up because having something in my hands felt better than standing there empty. 5 minutes passed, maybe 10, long enough for my coffee to go cold in memory, long enough for my mind to start building impossible scenarios out of every small sound in the hall. A floorboard, a muffled voice, the faint scrape of something being set down. I moved toward the door twice and stopped myself both times. Damien had not told me to hide because he enjoyed control. He had told me because something had shifted, and I had finally seen enough of his world to understand that hesitation inside it could be expensive. Still, the waiting got under my skin. By the time the knock came, at the study door, I was standing right beside it. Claire, Damien's voice, low and controlled. Open it. Relief is a dangerous emotion. It makes you forget caution for one stupid second. I unlocked the door too fast, and found him on the other side exactly as I had left him, and not at all the same. Jacket back on, phone in one hand, expression composed into something cooler than before. Behind him, the sitting room looked untouched. No overturned furniture. No sign that anything unusual had happened. Of course not. Trouble in Damien Moretti's world did not announce itself with chaos. It wore a quiet face and expensive shoes. Who was it? I asked. He stepped aside so I could come out, then closed the study door behind me. A courier. That is not the whole truth. No, he did not deny it, which I was beginning to realize was his version of consideration. It was a message delivered by someone who did not know what he was carrying. My stomach tightened. For you. His eyes met mine. For us. That single word changed the air in the room. Us. Not because it was soft. Not because it promised anything. Because it acknowledged, without pretending otherwise, that my life had crossed some invisible line and was now entangled with his whether I liked it or not. What kind of message? I asked. Damien walked to the table and picked up a cream-colored envelope I had not seen before. No seal. No name on the front. He held it for a second, then handed it to me. Inside was a photograph. Me. Leaving Belafonte's through the employee exit last night. Coat half-buttoned, head turned toward the rain. The angle was from across the street. High enough to be deliberate. My fingers went cold around the paper. There was a note clipped to the back in clean black type. She does not belong to your world. Send her back before it learns her name. I read it twice because my mind refused to settle on the meaning all at once. When it finally did, I looked up too fast. What does that mean? Damien's face gave away nothing. It means whoever planned last night now knows two things. That you are with me, and that I did not distance myself from you when I had the chance. Distance yourself? I repeated. You make it sound so simple. It could have been. He said it without cruelty. Just fact. If I had sent you away and let them believe you were incidental, their focus might have shifted. I stared at him. But you did not. No, why? The question came out softer than I intended. More personal too. Something in his expression tightened, not with anger, but restraint. Because they already had your building under watch by dawn. Because they identified your routine in under 6 hours. Because a woman who saved my life does not become expendable to make a problem more convenient. The room went still around that sentence. I looked down at the photo again because the alternative was looking at him while my chest tried to do something foolish. No one had ever said a thing like that to me. Not in those words. Not with that kind of certainty. My entire life had been built around being useful, dependable. The one who adjusted, took the extra shift, made the list, handled the bill, swallowed the stress, and kept moving. Expendable was the shadow word that came with all of it, whether anyone said it out loud or not. Damien had just rejected that idea like it offended him. This is insane, I whispered. Yes. I cannot stay hidden in a townhouse forever. No, I have class on Monday. You are not going to class on Monday. The sharpness in his answer snapped me back into myself. There it is, I said. That thing you do. You decide the whole future in one sentence and expect everyone else to adjust. Because I can protect you if I know where you are. That is not the same as living. For the first time since I had met him, something flashed hot beneath Damien's control. Not anger at me. Frustration at the truth of what I said. He took one step closer. Do you think I do not know that? His voice stayed low, but it carried more force now. Do you think I wanted this for you? No, I said, and that was the problem. I believed him. The anger bled out of me all at once, leaving only exhaustion and the photograph in my trembling hand. I just want my life back. He looked at me for a long moment, and when he spoke again, the sharpness had gone. So do I. That should not have startled me, but it did. Because until that second I had not really considered the possibility that Damien wanted something back too. Not power. Not control. Something simpler and maybe harder. The version of his world where betrayal stayed theoretical and women like me never appeared in photographs clipped to threats. I set the picture down on the table because I did not want to hold it anymore. What happens if I leave anyway? I asked quietly. He did not pretend to misunderstand. Then I put protection on you from a distance. And if I refuse that too? His jaw tightened once. Then I spend every hour wondering whether the next phone call I get will come too late. The honesty of it hit harder than any command could have. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time the aura of control around Damien Moretti did not read as dominance. It read as strain, discipline under pressure, a man forcing order onto something that had already slipped beyond his design. You really think they will come after me again? I said. Yes. Because I saw too much. Because you mattered at the wrong moment. I let out a slow breath and turned toward the window. The street below remained stubbornly ordinary. A man walked a golden retriever in a navy scarf. A bus hissed to the curb. Somewhere nearby, someone was playing piano badly enough that a few notes drifted up through the glass. Real life. Ordinary life. So close I could almost taste it. I hate this, I said. Damien came to stand beside me. Not touching, not crowding, just near enough that I could feel the heat of him at my shoulder. I know. I hate needing your help. I know that too. I glanced at him. You sound very calm for someone being difficult on purpose. I am not difficult on purpose. I raised a brow. That is the first lie you have told me. Something flickered at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile exactly, but close enough to loosen the knot in my chest by half an inch. Then his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, and whatever he saw erased that softness immediately. What now? I asked. Damien typed a fast reply, slipped the phone back into his pocket, and turned fully toward me. Now, he said, voice going cool and precise again. We find out why Matteo Voss just checked into a hotel in Midtown under a false name 40 minutes after sending you that photograph. For one suspended second, neither of us moved. Midtown. False name. 40 minutes after sending me a photograph that proved I was being watched. The city outside the townhouse windows suddenly felt too large and too close at the same time, like Manhattan had folded in on itself and left me standing at the seam. He is running, I said. Damien's gaze stayed on me, sharp and unreadable. No, how can you know that? Because men who run quietly do not send messages first. He reached for his coat where he had draped it over the chair and slipped it on in one fluid motion, every gesture controlled, efficient, final. He wants us to react. My pulse kicked hard. Then do not. Something almost like approval flickered in his expression. That would be easier if you were not staying 6 miles from where you were photographed last night. I looked at the picture still lying on the table and felt anger rise through the fear again, cleaner this time. Anger was better. Anger had shape. Then let me come with you. The answer should have been immediate. A flat no. A command wrapped in calm. Instead, Damien went still in that particular way he had when he was recalculating. Absolutely not, he said at last, but there was less force in it than before. That sounded delayed, I said. I am learning. From me. Against my better judgment, yes. Under any other circumstances, I might have smiled. Instead, I stepped closer, close enough that he had to look down slightly to hold my gaze. Listen to me. He sent that photograph because he wants to turn me into leverage. Fine. But he also assumes I scare easily and stay where I am put. That is information too. Damien's face hardened by a degree. This is not a game of strategy for you, Claire. I know that. My voice stayed low but steady. It is my life. That is exactly why I am done letting everyone else move me around like I am the only person in the room not allowed to understand the plan. The room fell silent. Somewhere outside, a car horn sounded and faded. Damien looked at me for a long moment. and I could almost feel the argument happening behind his eyes. Risk. Timing. Variables. Me. Finally, he exhaled once through his nose and reached for his phone. Luca, he said when the call connected. We are not approaching the hotel yet. I want eyes on every entrance, every elevator bank, every service corridor. Quietly. No contact until I say otherwise. He listened, then added, and send the Midtown floor plans to my secure tablet. He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. You are not coming into the hotel, he said. But you are coming with me as far as the command suite 3 blocks away. I blinked. That is not exactly a victory lap. It is more than I intended to allow. So I should feel honored. You should feel supervised. Against all logic, that almost made me laugh. Almost. You are impossible. So I have been told. He moved toward the hall, then stopped when I did not follow fast enough. Claire. I looked up. His voice changed on my name, quieter and more dangerous for it. Once we leave this townhouse, you stay next to me or with Luca. You do not open a door, answer a question, or trust a face because it looks harmless. Do you understand? I should have bristled. I should have hated the authority in his tone. Instead, I nodded because beneath the command was something I could no longer pretend not to hear. Concern. Not abstract. Not strategic. Personal. I understand, I said. We were halfway to the door when my phone buzzed in my sweater pocket. The sound sliced through the quiet so sharply I almost jumped. Damien stopped instantly. Who is it? I pulled the phone out and stared at the screen. Unknown number. A photo message. My fingers went cold before I even opened it. Damien took one look at my face and held out his hand. I gave him the phone without arguing. His expression did not change when he read the message, but the air around him did. Colder. Sharper. What? I asked. He turned the screen toward me. It was another photograph. Not me this time. My mother's apartment building in Brooklyn. Front entrance. Time stamped from 4 minutes ago. Beneath it, one line of text. You taught him to look twice. Now let us see what else you notice. For a second the room tilted. I grabbed the edge of the console table to steady myself. My mother. The words came out like breath instead of sound. Damien was already moving, one hand catching my elbow before I could stumble and the other reaching for his phone. Luca, he said, voice gone to steel. Package Brooklyn now. Full perimeter on Margaret Bennett's building. Move. He listened for half a second, then snapped, now. He ended the call and turned back to me. I had never seen him look angry before. Not truly. It was not loud. It was not wild. It was worse. Completely contained, like fury had been pressed into diamond. Claire, he said, and for the first time since I met him, I heard something break through the control. Look at me. I did. Barely. Your mother will not be touched, he said. Each word landed with frightening certainty. Not while I am breathing. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. You cannot promise that. He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the force of him, the absolute stillness he wore when the world pushed hardest. Watch me. Then he took my phone from the table, slid it into his pocket, and opened the townhouse door. Men in dark suits were already moving in the hall, silent and fast. The whole building seemed to wake around us. I stood there with my heart hammering and my ordinary life collapsing in clean, deliberate pieces, and Damien Moretti looked back at me once before leading me into the storm. You saved me with one glass, he said, voice low and lethal and impossibly steady. Now let me show them what that cost.